The Galactic Union's Grand Assembly was an event where the greatest civilizations showcased their advancements, and this year, humanity had been invited for the first time. To most of the older species, humans were nothing more than a young, reckless race with an inflated sense of confidence. They were tolerated, not respected. The Zorvath Dominion, one of the most powerful war-driven species, saw the humans as an amusing novelty, something to be mocked rather than feared. Their warriors stood tall in the Grand Chamber, their reptilian eyes glimmering with arrogance as they watched the human delegation take their seats. The challenge was inevitable. Every species had to prove itself in some way, and the Zorvath took it upon themselves to issue the test. A display of might, they called it, a tradition where a new species had to demonstrate its capability in either battle, tactics, or sheer technological prowess. Most species struggled, failed, or barely passed. No one had ever impressed the Union on their first attempt. Commander Elias Carter leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable as the Zorvath High Warlord sneered down at him. "Humans," the warlord said, his deep voice filled with amusement. "If your kind wishes to be taken seriously, you must prove that you are not just another primitive race that stumbled into the stars. Show us what you can do." The chamber filled with murmurs. Some found the challenge unnecessary. Humanity had already secured its place in the Union. But others were eager to see the so-called unpredictable species fail. Carter didn't even hesitate. He leaned forward, smirked, and simply said, "Oh, you want a demonstration? Watch this." Within hours, the test was set. A single human warship, the Dauntless, was selected for the challenge. Its task? To navigate a death zone in the Outer Rim, a chaotic stretch of space riddled with black holes, unstable wormholes, and plasma storms. The course had been attempted before by various species, and none had completed it without suffering massive damage. Some had lost entire fleets. The Zorvath believed this would humble humanity, force them to accept their place below the true powers of the galaxy. But the humans, as always, had other plans. The Dauntless arrived at the designated starting point, its sleek black hull gleaming under the distant light of a dying star. Inside the command center, Captain Mara Reynolds stood calmly, watching the swirling chaos on the view screen. "Begin calculations," she ordered, and her crew immediately got to work. Unlike the other species that had attempted this course, the humans weren't relying on sheer durability or brute force. They weren't going to push through obstacles and hope for the best. No, they were going to dance through them. The Galactic Union spectators watched from a distance, their fleets observing every movement as the human ship began its run. At first, the Zorvath were unimpressed. The Dauntless moved slowly, cautiously. But then, without warning, it accelerated. The ship twisted and rolled in ways no other vessel dared to, slipping between gravitational distortions with unnatural precision. Plasma storms lashed out, but the Dauntless moved as if it already knew where each strike would land. The black holes, which had torn apart other ships, became mere obstacles, each one accounted for with split-second calculations that allowed the vessel to slingshot around them with terrifying efficiency. The Zorvath warlord frowned, his claws digging into the armrest of his seat as he watched in disbelief. "That's not possible," he muttered. But it was. The humans had a unique way of thinking, a reckless genius that other species simply didn't possess. Where others saw danger, they saw opportunity. They weren't afraid to take risks, to push their ships beyond what was considered safe or logical. And that made them dangerous. The final stretch of the course was the worst, a collapsing wormhole that shifted unpredictably, swallowing anything that entered at the wrong moment. The Zorvath had seen ships torn apart in an instant, their calculations always a fraction too slow to predict the instability. The Dauntless didn't hesitate. Captain Reynolds took a deep breath, gave a single command, and the ship dived straight in. Gasps filled the command centers of the observing fleets. The Zorvath warlord rose from his seat, prepared to declare humanity's failure only for his words to die in his throat. The Dauntless didn't vanish. It reappeared on the other side, completely intact. The course had been conquered. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, in a quiet voice, one of the Union's senior officials murmured, "They weren't even struggling. The humans had done the impossible, and they had done it effortlessly. The Dauntless had done what no other ship had ever managed, navigated through the death zone with perfect precision, avoiding destruction where even the most advanced fleets had failed. But that was just the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come, and this time, it wouldn't just be about maneuvering through a storm of cosmic dangers. It would be a test of battle, a test to see whether humanity truly belonged among the greatest military forces of the galaxy. The Zorvath Dominion, humiliated by the human success in the first trial, refused to acknowledge their skill. Navigation is one thing, their high warlord had sneered, his reptilian eyes burning with disdain. But a true warrior race must prove itself in combat. The challenge was set. The Dauntless would face off against an elite Zorvath fleet in a simulated battle. The rules were simple: survive and defeat the enemy without sustaining critical damage. It was meant to be an unwinnable scenario. The Zorvath had been waging wars for centuries, their tactics perfected through countless conflicts. Their ships were designed for destruction, built with thick armor, advanced shielding, and weapons capable of tearing through anything in their path. Against them, the Dauntless seemed outmatched. Smaller, lighter, and with fewer guns, it looked almost fragile in comparison. The Galactic Union watched with quiet anticipation. No one truly expected humanity to win. They had impressed with their speed and skill, but battle was different. This was war, and the Zorvath were war incarnate. The countdown began. The battlefield was a simulated war zone, a vast asteroid field littered with debris, where ambushes and strategic positioning would be crucial. As the signal was given, the Zorvath fleet moved immediately, their ships forming a near impenetrable wall of firepower. They had studied human combat records. Humans were aggressive, unpredictable, but that wouldn't help them here. The Zorvath would box them in, cut off their escape routes, and overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But the humans didn't play by the rules of other species. From the very first moment, the Dauntless did something no one expected. It vanished. One moment, it was in plain view, then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The Zorvath commanders snarled in confusion. Their scanners picked up nothing. Had the humans fled? Was this cowardice? No. It was something far worse. Without warning, a Zorvath cruiser exploded. The blast sent shockwaves through the fleet, throwing nearby ships into chaos. Before they could react, another explosion followed. The Dauntless reappeared for only a fraction of a second, just long enough to fire precise, calculated shots before disappearing again. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't cloaking technology. It was raw, unfiltered human ingenuity. The ship was using the battlefield itself, hiding within the shifting debris, using asteroids for cover, moving unpredictably. The Zorvath relied on strict formations, controlled tactics, but the humans? They fought like they thought outside the box, bending the very concept of strategy to their will. The warlord watching from the command center slammed his fist against the table. How are they predicting our movements? He growled, watching as his fleet fell apart one ship at a time. The answer was simple. Humans weren't just fighting with technology. They were fighting with instinct. They saw patterns, exploited weaknesses no other species even noticed. Every species fought with rules. Humans fought with creativity. The Dauntless weaved through the enemy ranks, dodging incoming fire with impossible precision. It struck where it hurt the most: engines, weapon systems, weak points that had never been exploited before. In mere minutes, the elite Zorvath fleet, a force feared across the galaxy, was in ruins. Their formations had collapsed, their strategy shattered. They had expected a straightforward battle. Instead, they had been pulled into a nightmare where the enemy was everywhere and nowhere all at once. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The Dauntless emerged from the wreckage, not a single critical hit on its hull. The battlefield was silent. The Galactic Union, who had prepared themselves to witness humanity's failure, now found themselves staring at something they could barely comprehend. The humans had won. Not just won, they had dominated. The Zorvath warlord's face was twisted with disbelief. He had never seen his forces crushed so easily, so effortlessly. He wanted to protest, to claim that the battle was unfair, but he couldn't. The evidence was right in front of him. The humans had done the impossible. The realization spread like wildfire across the Union. The murmurs grew louder, species exchanging nervous glances. Humanity was no mere upstart race. They were something far more dangerous. If this was what they could do with just one ship, what could their entire fleet accomplish? A single thought echoed in the minds of every leader present: we have underestimated them. The humans had proved their strength, not through brute force, but through sheer intelligence, adaptability, and fearlessness. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again. The Galactic Union had never seen anything like it. The humans had done the impossible, not once, but twice: first by navigating the deadly death zone with unmatched precision, then by crushing the Zorvath fleet in a simulated battle with tactics so unorthodox that even the most experienced war strategists were left speechless. But for humanity, this was only the beginning. The true test of their tactical genius was yet to come, and this time the stakes were higher than ever. The Union's leading war council, made up of the most powerful military minds across the galaxy, wanted one final proof of humanity's capability. They designed a war simulation unlike any other one that no species had ever completed with full success. It was a war scenario that mimicked a real battlefield, complete with shifting conditions, supply shortages, and an overwhelming enemy force. The challenge was simple: survive against a superior force while protecting an allied fleet. Every species that had attempted this simulation before had failed. The conditions were deliberately unfair, meant to expose the limitations of any race. The War Council believed this would finally show the true limits of humanity's abilities. But the humans, as always, had no intention of losing. The battlefield was set in deep space, with asteroid fields and nebulae creating a chaotic environment. The opposing force consisted of hundreds of simulated enemy ships, programmed with the tactics of the most dominant warlike species in the Union. The human side had only a fraction of that number, along with a group of weaker allied ships that needed to be defended. The moment the scenario began, the enemy forces surged forward in a crushing wave of firepower. Every other species that had faced this scenario had followed the same pattern: retreat, set up defensive lines, and try to hold out for as long as possible. The humans, however, did the exact opposite. Instead of pulling back, they advanced. The Dauntless and its fleet moved aggressively, charging straight into the enemy lines in a maneuver so reckless that the Union's War Council gasped in disbelief. "They've lost their minds," one of the alien strategists muttered. "They're committing suicide." But what looked like madness was, in reality, something far more terrifying. The humans weren't just attacking. They were controlling the battlefield. Instead of engaging in a head-on fight, the Dauntless led the charge, weaving between enemy ships with impossible precision, forcing them to adjust their formations. The moment the enemy adapted, the humans changed their strategy again, shifting positions and attacking from unexpected angles. They used the battlefield itself as a weapon, hiding behind asteroids, using debris to block incoming fire, manipulating sensor readings to create false signals. The enemy fleet, which was programmed to use the most logical and calculated tactics, struggled to keep up. The humans weren't following a predictable pattern. They were playing a different game entirely. Within minutes, chaos erupted. The enemy fleet, which had started with an overwhelming advantage, found itself scattered, divided into smaller groups as the humans forced them into unfavorable positions. And then, in a move that left even the most experienced Union commanders in stunned silence, the humans did something no one expected. They abandoned traditional tactics entirely. The Dauntless and its fleet began setting traps, leading the enemy into kill zones where precise strikes crippled their strongest ships. They used electronic warfare, hacking into enemy systems to disrupt their coordination. They launched feints, tricking the enemy into thinking they were retreating, only to counterattack at the last second. The battle was no longer a test of firepower. It was a psychological war, and the humans were winning. The War Council watched in stunned silence. They had seen countless battles, studied thousands of war strategies, but nothing like this. The humans weren't just fighting. As the battle progressed, the outcome became clear. The enemy fleet, despite its numerical superiority, was being dismantled piece by piece. The weaker Allied ships, which were supposed to be easy targets, remained untouched, protected by the precise coordination of human forces. The final blow came when the Dauntless executed a maneuver that had never been attempted in the history of the simulation. Using the gravitational pull of a nearby asteroid, it slingshotted around the battlefield at a speed too fast for the enemy to react, bypassing their defenses and delivering a single decisive strike to their command ship. The battle ended. Silence filled the war room. The humans had done it. They had completed a simulation that no other species had ever won. And they had done it with such precision, such ruthless efficiency, that the entire War Council was forced to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about warfare. The Zorvath warlord, who had once mocked humanity, now watched them with something that almost resembled fear. One of the senior strategists, an elder from the Cathari race, finally spoke. "This isn't just strategy," he murmured. "This is art." Humanity had proven, beyond any doubt, they were something else entirely. A force that could not be predicted. A power that could not be controlled. And as the leaders of the galaxy watched the humans stand victorious once again, one terrifying thought echoed in their minds. If this is what they can do now, what will they become in the future? The Zorvath Dominion had never known defeat, not until humanity arrived. Their fleets had ruled the stars for centuries, their war strategies perfected through countless battles. But now, everything had changed. The humans had crushed them in a simulated battle, outmaneuvered them in a war scenario that no other species had ever survived, and humiliated them in front of the entire Galactic Union. The Dominion's pride was in shambles. Their warlords, once feared across the galaxy, were now the subjects of whispers, their reputation cracked like a fragile shell. The Zorvath could not allow this humiliation to continue. They had to prove their superiority at any cost. And so, in an act of desperation, they decided to do what they did best. They declared war.it wasn't an official war. The Galactic Union would never allow it. Instead, the Zorvath chose a different path, an ambush, a strike from the shadows, a battle that would never be recorded in the history books, but would send a clear message. If they could not defeat humanity in fair combat, they gathered an elite fleet, handpicked from their most experienced warriors, and set a single objective: destroy the Dauntless before the humans could ever see them coming. It was a coward's tactic, but to the Zorvath, victory mattered more than honor. The Dauntless had just completed its debriefing at the Galactic Union's primary station when the attack came. The humans had no reason to expect trouble. They had proven themselves. They had won. But the Zorvath were not willing to accept that reality. Without warning, the station's long-range sensors lit up with hostile signatures, dozens of warships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons already primed. The attack was swift, brutal. The station's defenses barely had time to activate before the first wave of plasma fire struck, tearing through hulls, shattering shields. Explosions ripped through the docking bays, sending debris spiraling into the void. The Zorvath didn't issue any warnings, didn't demand surrender. They came to destroy, nothing more. On board the Dauntless, Captain Elias Voss barely had time to react before alarms screamed through the ship. His crew had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a controlled battle. This was an execution. All stations, battle positions. Voss barked as the ship's systems roared to life. The Dauntless detached from the station, its engines burning at full thrust. The Zorvath were already moving to surround them, cutting off escape routes, trapping them like prey. They wanted this to be quick, decisive. They thought the humans would panic. They thought wrong. The first enemy barrage slammed into the Dauntless, but it was already moving. Unlike the station, which had been caught off guard, the human warship reacted with terrifying speed. Instead of pulling back, it surged forward, breaking through the encirclement before the Zorvath could tighten their grip. The enemy warships hesitated for just a second, confused by the reckless move. And in war, a second was all the Dauntless needed. Voss didn't waste time. "Target their lead destroyer," he ordered. full spread. The Dauntless unleashed a devastating volley of kinetic rounds and plasma fire. The Zorvath had expected a desperate escape, not a counterattack. Their lead ship, caught off guard, took the full impact of the strike. Its shields flared, flickered, then collapsed. A second later, the warship erupted in a fiery explosion, its shattered remains scattering into the battlefield. The Zorvath fleet faltered. They had the numbers, the firepower, but for the first time, doubt crept into their ranks. The humans were supposed to be running. Instead, they were fighting back. But the Zorvath were not defeated yet. Their remaining ships regrouped, adjusting their strategy. They had underestimated the Dauntless before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. A coordinated barrage rained down on the human vessel, forcing it to maneuver through a storm of destruction. The Dauntless dodged, weaved, its engines pushed to their limits, but it couldn't avoid everything. A lucky shot from a Zorvath battleship struck the rear thrusters, sending a violent shudder through the ship. Damage reports flooded the bridge. The Zorvath saw the opening and moved in for the kill. But Voss and his crew had no intention of dying here. "Bring us around," he ordered. Full power to forward cannons. The Dauntless spun in a maneuver so sharp it should have torn the ship apart. The Zorvath weren't prepared for such an aggressive move. The humans fired everything they had, not aiming for the strongest ships, but the weakest points in the enemy formation. Their fleet was well armored, heavily armed, but it was also designed for frontal engagements, not chaotic skirmishes. The humans exploited that flaw without mercy. The Zorvath ships began to crumble, their formation breaking apart as the Dauntless tore through them with precision strikes. What had started as an ambush had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. One by one, the enemy warships fell, their commanders unable to comprehend how their perfect plan had unraveled so quickly. The Zorvath had expected a massacre. They just hadn't realized it would be their own ASL. The last enemy vessel was crippled, the surviving ships fled, their once proud warriors now reduced to scattered remnants. The battle was over. The Dauntless, though damaged, still stood, and humanity had won yet again. Across the galaxy, word of the battle spread like wildfire. The Zorvath had tried to erase their humiliation. Instead, they had only deepened it. The Galactic Union, which had once doubted humanity's place among them, now saw the truth. The humans were not just another species. They were something else entirely, something unstoppable. And the Zorvath, once feared by all, were now left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. The galaxy was silent. The battle between humanity and the Zorvath Dominion had sent shockwaves across every star system, every council, every military power that had once dismissed humans as an insignificant race. No one had expected them to win. No one had even considered it a possibility. The Zorvath were the oldest warriors of the Galactic Union, undefeated for centuries. Their tactics had been studied, perfected, and feared. Yet, in a single battle, humanity had shattered them. The Dauntless had not only survived the Zorvath's ambush, but had turned it into a massacre. The surviving Zorvath ships had fled in disgrace, their warlords humiliated beyond measure. But this was not the end. The real lesson was yet to come. The Galactic Union convened in an emergency session. Every major species was present. Their representatives gathered in the colossal Senate Hall orbiting the core star of the Union's capital. The Zorvath, still reeling from their loss, demanded that humanity be punished. They claimed the battle had been unfair, that the humans had used underhanded tactics, that their fleet had been outmaneuvered through sheer trickery rather than skill. Their voices echoed with desperation, a pathetic attempt to salvage what little pride they had left. But the other species were not fools. They had seen the battle records. They had watched the footage, witnessed them. Strategy, the precision, the brutal efficiency of the human warship. No, this was no accident. This was no trick. The humans had outmatched the Zorvath in every way, and the galaxy had seen it happen in real time. The human delegation arrived, led by Captain Elias Voss himself. He walked into the Senate Hall with calm confidence, his expression unreadable, his uniform crisp despite the fact that he had just come from a war zone. The room fell silent as he took his place. The Zorvath warlord, face twisted with rage, rose from his seat, pointing a clawed finger at Voss. "You have violated the peace of the Union," he snarled. "Your kind has no respect for the laws of war. You are dangerous." Voss did not flinch. He did not react to the accusation, did not let the anger of the Zorvath warlord shake him. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Dangerous?" he repeated. "You're right. We are." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The other species shifted in their seats. They had expected Voss to deny the claim, to argue, to defend humanity's actions. Instead, he had embraced them. He let the silence stretch before he spoke again. "The Zorvath attacked us without provocation. They launched a cowardly ambush, targeting civilians, attempting to erase us before we became a threat. And yet, here we stand." His gaze swept across the chamber, locking eyes with every leader present. "You call us dangerous. But tell me, what does that say about you? What does that say about this union?" Murmurs rippled through the room. No one wanted to answer that question, because deep down, they already knew the answer. The Galactic Union had always operated under an unspoken rule. The strong dictated the order of the galaxy. The Zorvath had ruled through fear, through military power, through the belief that no one could challenge them. But that belief was gone now. The humans had proven that strength alone was not enough. Intelligence, adaptability, resilience, these were the true weapons of war, and humanity had mastered them all. The Zorvath warlord bared his teeth. "We are still stronger than you," he growled. "You may have won one battle, but if the Dominion truly wished, we could wipe your species from existence." Voss smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a quiet, knowing smile, the kind that sent a chill down the spine of everyone watching. "You could try," he said. "But let me ask you something, warlord. Do you really want to find out what happens when humanity stops holding back?" A heavy silence fell upon the chamber. The meaning behind his words was clear. The battle with the Dauntless had been fought with only one warship. One. And yet, it had brought the Zorvath fleet to its knees. What would happen if the full might of humanity was unleashed? What if they were truly pushed into a war? The answer was unthinkable. The Zorvath knew it, and so did the rest of the galaxy. The warlord clenched his jaw, his rage burning in his eyes, but he said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. Humanity had sent its message. They did not need the approval of the Galactic Union. They did not need recognition. They had already won. The meeting ended with no punishment, no sanctions, no declaration of war. The Union leaders understood that any further aggression against humanity would only lead to disaster. And as the human delegation walked out of the chamber, the lesson was clear. The galaxy had underestimated them. They had mocked them, dismissed them as a primitive species, a minor power. That mistake had cost the Zorvath dearly. It had cost them their pride, their dominance, their unquestioned rule. Humanity had proven themselves in battle. But more than that, they had shown the galaxy something far more terrifying. They were not just another species in the stars. They were something new, something unpredictable, something unstoppable. And from this moment forward, every species, every empire, every warlord would remember this day. Because this was the day humanity taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget.